Your Humanities Half-hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Welcome to your Humanities Half-hour. I'm Catherine Perry. One of our guests today has written, "How you get where you're going is often more important than where you wind up." Our guests today are Tom Zink, a former Peace Corps volunteer to the Marianas, and also Lino Olopai, one of the Peace Corps instructors who met Tom a number of years ago. Gentlemen, welcome to your Humanities Half-hour.
Thank you,
Thank you.
So, Tom, start us off. How did you end up in the Peace Corps and in the Marianas?
How did I end up on Saipan? By luck. I mean, not by luck. The Peace Corps decided. I applied, and when I was an undergraduate, and you put down your first, second, third requests for where you want to go. I got my second request, which was called East Asia Pacific, and I got a letter said I'm going to Micronesia. And I looked on a map and I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
So then they said, you better show up in California in June 1968 for some training. And I got in line. I got my whatever registration stuff. And they said, you're going to the Marianas. And I said, okay. Marianas, fine. Okay, where's that? So then we flew to Guam. And then the training for the group of 55 trainees that year was on Rota, and so they flew us to Rota for our training. And during the training, towards the end of the training, there was a selection process of where they needed teachers, where they needed people to teach English, PE, that kind of thing. And I was very interested in PE and was interested in Olei school, and they assigned me to Olei for my first year. So that's how I came to be in Micronesia, Marianas, Saipan, and Olei, and that's where I met Tatalino. He was one of the language instructors who taught us, it was called High Intensity Language Training, HILT. So we had like 8 or 10 hours a day the first 2 or 3 weeks of Chamorro, where the teachers would say to us, before we do a dialogue drill, Ekolok, Mungo maripiti. Which means, please listen, don't repeat. And then when they would do the dialogue, then they would say, repite después de Guahu, which means repeat after me.
How amazing. After 40 years, he still remembers.
50 years.
I have an audio loop for some things, especially language.
So, Uncle Lino, you first met Tom there in Rota as an instructor. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I got hooked in to become a teacher back then. I befriended John Phillips, who was coordinating the language program at the time. And John really needed, teachers. I was a police officer back then, and I have no experience in teaching. And there was 2 days training at Harput, to train teachers to become teachers. So I went there and I got selected and I ended up in Rota. And that's how I met not Tom, but several other volunteers like Ralph Jumbly. Who were the others?
Andy Pavley, Tom Fisher.
Right. They were all gang. So that's how I met up with them.
So back in the day when you got there, now we say Rota is beautiful, Rota is delicious, but back then they called it Mamis Luta.
Mamis Luta. Sweet Luta,
yes.
Right? Isn't it?
Yes.
It's in the book.
You got the enormous allowance of $1.50 a day back then.
Is that right?
Well, that's what your book says. But for
$1.50 a day, wow! So that would be for the what they call them, the grasshoppers at the Rota Inn, Rota Hotel. Had the bar,
yes.
And the beer,
But fortunately, you were assigned a host family. Who was your host family?
It was a family of Manassas Barcinas. He had a son named Manassas. And I can't remember his wife's name, but I think his mom lived with them as well. And I roomed there with another guy named Mark Larson. And all of us, all 55, were assigned to various families, Rotanese families, throughout the village. And there was one village in Song Song in 1968.
So, what were your first impressions of the island?
Well, one first impression was not on Rota, but on Guam. When the plane landed, the charter flight brought us, and we were making our way to the gangway back down to the tarmac, and the tropical humidity hit me, and it was like, oh, wow, what is this? It felt like being in a sauna, you know. And I guess I adapted to it because I stayed for 2 years, and, you know, was never out of it. So, but that was the first impression. And the other first impression was first time we landed on Rota, and several pickup trucks or jeeps or something were there to pick us up. We threw our luggage in, and a couple of us were sitting on the pile of luggage in the pickup bed and just driving down the crushed coral road through, and kids coming out and waving down to Song Song and waving to these new white people coming in. Yeah. So that was the first impression. Feeling really excited and relieved that I was finally on the ground, and traveling was done for a while, and yeah.
So you actually learned.
It was all coral road, gravel road from the airport to Song Song at the time.
Everything was
and
coral
there were
road.
Dust from the airport to the village, and it will make you even whiter, you know, with all the dust.
So what was it like teaching these Americans who were probably almost all of them out of the country for the first time, young, showing up in our little islands, Uncle Lino?
I tell you, Kat, and probably even to our listeners, I was nervous at first. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not a teacher. And I was nervous at first for that first few days. Then after that, we start fooling around with them, you know, with the volunteers. Tom is one of them. We'll add vocabulary that is not necessarily our language, you know, just to release them, to laugh. You know, relax and make them tune. As a matter of fact, we have a course where I teach you guys just the sound, Well, few of you, Ralph and I forgot who the other one. And at the time, Kat, there was only Chamorro material. So I was teaching Chamorro language. Then the following year, which I end up coordinating the language and the cross-culture of the program, that's when we produced the Carolinian language. So the second year, I end up, recruiting my brother Max and my sister Florence, several others, Louis Wobble. And we wrote, a short, basic Carolinian material for that second year. So the second year we have both the Carolinian and Chamorro language. But the one on Rota, we only have Chamorro. And it was, after I get used to them, it became very exciting. And I loosen up, and I think I share more to them than what is needed or whatever the program is all about. And I also learn a lot from them. Growing up in a traditional family where we listen to our elders, our community followers, when I mixed up with them, they said, no, you can speak up against your government on the issue that, it's not right. So I said, oh yeah, can I do that? Because it's against, our tradition even to do that.
How did you feel about that, Tom, sharing with these people the many rights we enjoy as an American? Did you feel it was your responsibility as a member of the human race to share democracy, or?
Well, I didn't really get into the political part of why we were there or what the government was saying. And some people have called some of the stuff that I did when I got back to the States after and talked about teaching football or something, somebody disparagingly said, oh, cultural imperialism, But I was just there to absorb culture and language and the newness. It was just so new, the rain showers that come by and drench you, and then 5 minutes later, the sun's out and everything's steaming again, and just unlike weather that we were used to. And then, of course, the ocean and the reef and swimming and the beaches and in Rota. Yeah.
And with all of this intense language instruction, is there anything you remember here now, 50 years later?
Mm-hmm. Is this a setup? Halfway at the end of the hill, 2.5 weeks, our assignment as Peace Corp trainees was to come up with a Chamorro skit to perform at the Roundhouse in Rota for all of the Rotanese to come, many of whom were opening their homes to us. And there were 5 or 6 of us, including Louis Wobble, who was one of the Chamorro teachers that summer, who came up with a little robbery.
A robbery?
A robbery skit. So there was a Saki, and the sheriff, whatever that would be, and the storekeeper, the tenda, what would you call it? The person who kept the tenda.
Store, yeah.
Yeah. And so, then the sheriff comes in as I'm robbing the store. I'm the thief. Ralph says, "Kao Saki Hao," which is, "Are you the thief?" And I say, "Hungan Sakizu, I'm the thief." And he says, "Hatsa Kanaimu," raise your hand. So I stick him up and we do this little dance like we're going to draw our guns. And I forget how it ended, but everybody was cracking up. From then on, for the next 2 years, whenever I saw Louis Wobble, my name was not Tom or Mr. Jink, it was Kanaimo. Totally irrelevant to anything. It's just Kanaimo. That became my name. So there are lots of other memories too. There were two sisters, Sister Rosa and Sister Trinidad, who were our teachers.
At the time.
Yeah. And of course, when they would teach, it was all by modeling. Like if I'm walking, they would be saying that while they walked across the classroom. Well, we wanted to learn, what is it, Gumupu? I'm flying?
Yeah.
Their white habits on, they were flying. So, there's just lots of funny
and
stuff.
that's what I mean, Kat, when, over a few days I got comfortable with them and I end up, having a lot of fun with them. We joke the language skits that Tom talking about, and the stick dance, and the kuisasa and all of that. Mm-hmm. So I really enjoyed, and I learned a lot also from them, listening to the time. This is 50-some years ago when we were young and, we owned the world, so to speak, or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was fun.
Ready to change the world.
And one of the plan that Jody, Miss and I, when we attended that reunion in Santa Fe, is that we hope to encourage our leadership if they can sponsor few of them to come here and visit the classroom and share with the students what it was like,
life was like then.
Back then, 50-some years ago. That was the mid-60s, late 60s, early 70s. I think it'd be a good project,
Well, we've referred a couple times to your book, which is actually called Seasoned, a Memoir of Grief and Grace, and it has several chapters of your time here in Micronesia. But it's kind of a weird title to be discussing it seems like a happy time in your life. What is the premise of this book, and what part does your time in Micronesia play in this story?
You got another hour or two? So the grief part is that I grew up the second born of 5 children, and my older brother, when we were teenagers, was killed in a car crash. He was riding his bicycle delivering newspapers. And so it was the first part of the book is about growing up with him and with our family and what the family dynamics were like. And then he's suddenly gone, and then what happens after that and how the family dealt with it, or I might say did not really deal with it. And so in some ways I think that when I was last year of college, looking at the Peace Corps, it had a certain attraction for me, and I think it had to do with the fact that it gave me a chance to get away, to leave all that past behind. I mean, I've now known, and I've known for years, that you can't leave your past behind. It's always there. And that's why I wrote the book, because it was still there. And to this day, people read the book, or like Florence Salapeo read it. She said, "Tom, I never knew." And lots of people have said that they didn't know I'd lost a brother, and that's the story, basically, that I had this story and I couldn't tell it. Mm-hmm. And so once the story becomes told, and I think in humanities you know this, that if people can open up and tell their story, it allows other people to reflect and hear the echo maybe of their own story in someone's story. And so Peace Corp opportunity came along, and I just thought, what the heck, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen, which is a good attitude coming out here, or anything with life. And I think I did a complete, in terms of my cultural appreciation of island culture and language differences, and sort of the competitive win-lose mentality of North American culture or Western culture versus a different way of looking at fun and games. It just changed many decisions, influenced many decisions later on in my life. Yeah.
Well, our guests today are Tom Zink, a former Peace Corps volunteer here in the Marianas, and also Lino Olopai, one of their instructors. And we'll be back to hear more about Tom's time here after this break.
Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizuus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. Tom, you had another host family when you got here to Saipan.
Right. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I think the first 2 weeks we were here, there were 3 tropical storm warnings, and I had lodging in about 4 or 5 different places because nothing was working out. And we found an apartment, 5 volunteers, found an apartment next to Mount Carmel in Susupi. And I realized I didn't really want to live for 2 years with other Americans, so I came out to Oleai because that's where I was teaching. And I went to Stanley Torres, who was the district distad rep or something. I don't know what they called him then. And I said, this is what I'd like. And this was 6 months after Typhoon Jean, so many of the families were constructing the A-frame emergency typhoon shelters from FEMA. And he took me around to a number of places. And Carlos and Olympia Bora, bless their hearts, said, yes, we have a little house here that as soon as our typhoon shelter is done, we will move from, and Tom can live here. And we talked about rent, and Olympia said, no, you're teaching our children English in the school, there's no rent. But as time went on, I would help pay electric bills or, share the kerosene that I use for my kerosene stove, or different things like that, little in-kind things. They didn't ever ask me to babysit, though, because they had enough older siblings. But so there was Doris was the oldest, and then there was William, Lourdes, Rosalia, Bernadetta, and Jesusa, who is now Sue. And so there were 7 children. And then I left in 1970, and not long after Carlos Jr. was born. And Jody, my son, and I went out to Oleai yesterday and visited Carlos and Carlos Jr. Had a really nice time. And there's a picture in the book of me at my little house. Next to theirs in Oleai. So they tried to figure out...
Which is a tin house, a wooden frame with it, the old days,
So they tried to figure out from where...
kitchen.
That's long gone, obviously. But tried to figure out where I was standing. Because they'd seen this picture, right? And...
So how has it been?
We all stood there and took a picture there.
You guys have been really busy the last few days, going around, catching up. And this is actually your second visit. You were here, I believe, 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What has it been like, being back and Uncle Lino taking you around?
Well, it's different because of Typhoon U2. And I debated whether it made sense to come for 6 or 8 months, I've been thinking January would be a time to come. And then the typhoon came, and Jeannie Olopai, who was a volunteer here back when I was here, encouraged me to come and said it would make, mean a lot just to show up. And we really wanted to help clean up or fix things or do something, but it's obvious that a lot of that depends on funding, and there's, as Carlos Jr. Bora yesterday was saying, there's just waiting for applications and approvals and that kind of thing. But other than that, because we were here 5 years ago, a lot of things are I wouldn't say familiar, but recognizable. I still find myself sometimes going to a place and thinking, okay, now, what was here? Where was that Peace Corps office again? And there's no correlation between what was then and what is now. There's a few places, but
we got lost in Cagman yesterday.
We got lost in Cagman.
After coming back from the Forbidden Island.
And anybody not from Cagman, I think, gets lost in Cagman, if I can say that.
Crisscross street.
And I was telling Tom that. I said, Tom, even myself, when I come back, I got lost.
But the other thing is that there are beautiful spots here on Saipan that I never got to in 2 years in the Peace Corps because we didn't have cars and didn't have really access to cars, and you had to hope that some, the Micronesian friend or something could take you around or something. So we went out to Forbidden Island. We didn't go to Forbidden Island, but we got up at the viewpoint and saw that. Yeah. So,
Uncle Lino, what has the experience been like for you, having Tom come back and having time to really just spend time together and help him reminisce?
It really brings back memory of what it was growing up with a small community where we do a lot together as a group, not as individual, doing your own thing like the things that are happening today. We're all children are very independent. Mm-hmm. Back then it was a family project, family effort. The real indigenous Chamorro and Carolinian spirit of sharing. It was a big thing back then. We'll gather firewood, we'll feed the pigs and chickens, go to the farm, go fishing, and share those. It's quite a change. Today it's very hard even for myself to tell my own children what to do. If I tell them something to do, for them to do, in the back of my head always that they will probably refuse, because they have that freedom of choice. That
because of Tom.
Because they're not respecting their elders like they did.
What changes have you seen, Tom?
I call them tourist sites, like the access to Mount Tapachau the road is difficult, but I remember going there in 1968 and having to cut through the bush to get there. And, Bonsai Cliff and Suicide Cliff are all developed. Lots of development. The sewer system, there's no more benjos, which was, everybody had a benjo back in the day,
No more water
I remember being surprised 5 years ago that someone said, oh, those are illegal. I thought, what? In my mind, that was associated with living here.
One of the things that jumped out from your book, just one of the many cultural experiences you had, was your experience with finding out that the sense of belonging varies differently between North American culture and Micronesian culture. I think it had something to do with the guitar you had.
Yeah, tell us about your guitar.
Well, there's two things here.
They borrow your guitar.
There's a sense of welcome in Olea. I'll never forget when people knew I was going to move to Olea, they'd tell me, you're in our ganks now, be in our ganks. And so that was one thing, just a sense of belonging that could do no wrong. And then the other thing was the sense of reciprocity. And so these boys, Nick Nikai was one of them. I wish I could remember the other guys that were in this band that would play at the Olea bar there at the corner across from the school. And they would come over and strum my guitar while I'm doing lesson plans, and they're playing and singing and doing all that stuff, and then they're ready to go. And Nick says to me, Tom, can we borrow our guitar? And I thought, wait a minute, our guitar? And I said, and so I thought, okay, this is a chance to get to know how this whole thing works. And I trust it. Go, take it. It came back a week later, no problem, no dents, no scars, no broken strings and stuff like that. And I've done presentations about the stories in the book, and I always read that section to groups of people, and twice now, after I'm all done and I say, are there any questions, a person has raised their hand, and I do a song at the end of the presentation. So I'm getting the guitar out, and there's a question that says, "Hey Tom, is that our guitar?" So they picked up on that story, which is great. Yeah. So.
Well, we do want to mention again the name of the book. It's called Seasoned, a memoir of grief and grace by Tom Zink. That's Zink. And they can find it on Amazon or, let's see, you have a website, www.tomzink.ca, or at the library. But before we go today, any final thoughts for our listeners?
I would just say, parenthetically, if they want a copy of the book, it is available on Amazon, and you can find that on this Tom Zink, TOMZINK.ca, and it's also available as an ebook. The final thoughts are the time coming back to Saipan is always too short, but it's been great being here, and especially this time of year because it's more windy, not quite as
not very cold,
blistering hot, and we left behind. We live in Canada where it's snowy and cold, and so not looking forward to going back to that. But
Uncle Lino, any final thoughts?
Not really, Kat. Just I wish to share with the listeners, to believe in ourselves, be strong, and be proud of who we are.
I would just say, too, that this idea that Lino and Ping have been talking about of finding ways to bring former volunteers who remember a certain section of history of the islands to talk to the kids. I was a history major in college, and so to have verbal, living history. I hate to think of myself as being that old, but living history to talk and ask questions to, I think would be a wonderful idea.
Yeah, it'd be nice. It'd be nice if, someone out there listening, aside from our new leadership that are coming to the office, help out. It'd be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you the best for the rest of your trip here and your return home.
Thank you too, Kat.
Thank you, Kat.
Our guests today have been Tom Zink, a former Peace Corp volunteer in the Marianas and author of the book Seasoned, a memoir of grief and grace, and of course, Lino Olopai, a former Peace Corps language teacher. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.